This week, I'm talking with Mary Speta. Mary is the CEO of Amirah, New England. She's an advocate working to end commercial sexual exploitation. Mary also does research, educates, consults, informs, advises on public policy and legislative efforts to advance that mission. Hi, I'm Charles Galda. I'm the president of Vision New England. I'm your host for the Church in Action. Mary, thanks for being back with us. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. Always a pleasure to chat with you, Charles.
Well, it's nice of you to say it anyway. Hey. So maybe just reground us for folks who maybe didn't hear the last episode. But when we just use the phrase sexual exploitation, what are we talking about?
Yeah, sure. So at Amirah, we provide exit and aftercare services for folks leaving the sex trade. And most of that is sexual exploitation. There are multiple different definitions, especially when we get into legal terminology about, there's a difference between sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation, et cetera. But when we think about the commercial sex trade, so often we hear prostitution in our culture and think like Pretty Woman, Julia Roberts, or, some of these big movies, et cetera. Really, what we should be thinking is poverty. Ultimately, the commercial sex trade, prostitution in the United States is a phenomenon of poverty, addiction, and homelessness. And because of that, most of the commercial sex trade is sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. Globally, 84% of people trading sex are under third-party control and are not doing so by choice. And often it's because they don't have an economic alternative for survival. So that's the population that we work with, is anyone trading sex, regardless of how they got into it, folks who are looking for exit. Because we understand that the commercial sex trade is inherently gender-based violence. This is not a moral issue on behalf of folks trading sex, but rather this stems from a vulnerability that they have, and we partner with them in providing the resources and opportunities they need to get out.
And so that compulsion that forces people into this, that can be actual physical violence and threats to them or family, but it can also be just I just need to eat, or I may need to feed my kids, and now I'm forced into this life.
Yeah, it can be all of the above, and it can be anywhere from a brothel in Nevada to a brothel in Rhode Island, to pornography, to webcamming, to strip clubs. There are 9 different identified types of commercial sex in the United States and forms of sex trafficking. And so it exists on a spectrum. It's not just what we see in street prostitution or in escort agencies. There's a scale of this.
And so with that definition, and I don't take any issue with it, of course, the notion of this being a victimless crime, prostitution, or sort of victimless, is not accurate because there's a victim from the start.
Yes, absolutely. I find that the term sex trafficking it kind of trips us up in our understanding of this form of human trafficking, because when we hear sex, legally, in order to have sex, you have to have consent. What we're talking about is really, it's better understood as rape trafficking or sexual assault trafficking, because this person is not giving consent of their own accord to enter into this act with another person. There's force, there's fraud, or coercion, or all 3 are involved. When you have those involved, if we didn't have money on the table, the DA would immediately qualify that as sexual assault or rape or whatever is the legal definition in that state. As soon as we throw money down on the table, now it's prostitution. Yeah. And now we call it sex trafficking. So it's absolutely not a victimless crime at all. And I hear that very much in connection to pornography, particularly, because there's this notion that, like, I'm on the other side of a screen. This person has consented to do this on the other side of their camera. I'm just here, in my bedroom or wherever I am. They've already filmed this. I wasn't involved in their decision-making to film this, and therefore I'm not exploiting anyone, right? Well, where there is not a buyer, there is not a product.
Yeah.
So the only reason why pornography gets made is because there are buyers of pornography. And most people in pornography are, in fact, trafficking victims. You have no idea what is behind that camera for her. If it is someone holding her child saying, you're not going to see your kid until you do this scene, or if it's someone holding a gun or whatever it is. So yeah, absolutely not a victimless crime.
Or just even duress, and you can't give consent if you're under duress. And it's, I'm going to be, my children will be homeless if I don't do this.
Yes.
Right, which would be the economic persuasion you're talking about, or,
yes.
or control. And so how do people wind up in this situation? Is this a poverty issue? Are there risk factors? Are there tactics that are useful? Or how does somebody land in this spot?
Yeah, sure. It's such a long answer. Go read my dissertation. Is my is basically on this. It's all of those things. We look at poverty, we look at homelessness, we look at addiction. There's a huge connection between the opioid crisis and between addiction and the commercial sex trade. And not just in the person trading sex, either developing an addiction to deal with the trauma of trading sex or turning to the sex trade to pay for substances to feed their addiction. What we can often see is parents who have an addiction turning out their children to make money for their addiction. And so then, there's no known sort of average age of entry into the sex trade. We have an understanding that it's somewhere between age 15 and 25. And so there's a good chunk of people who enter as children, largely because they're being exploited by their families. Or they are, in the child welfare system. A bunch of folks, in foster care end up entering the sex trade due to just that neglect piece of things and not having a safe person to protect them from this happening. Poverty is a huge element to this. People turn to the sex trade out of dire economic need. We see anywhere from folks trying to pay for college to folks trying to pay for diapers, to folks trying to get food. So, any one of those things, we think about it systemically, and then we take that down to the individual level. We have to really do our homework to drive at what's the root cause that's caused this person to get into the sex trade, because that's what we got to deal with in order to get them out.
Yeah, and I know from our conversations that there's also people who are looking for kids online, young people online, grooming them, pretending to be friends with them, helping them, if you will, and then before they know it, they're dependent in a relationship they can't get out of.
Yeah, absolutely. So then we think about third-party control, like all of those things are vulnerabilities. When people ask me, how do people end up being trafficked? It's quite simple and also quite sickening at the same time, because people looking to exploit people look for the things that they can use to control them, So for a child, that is, what is that child seeking? Like, are they in a group foster home and they desperately want some, adult to step in and sort of be that caretaker? When we think about like homeless youth or even homeless adults who are struggling with substance use disorder, being going through withdrawal on the street, especially in the middle of winter, is one of the worst things that can happen to the human body. And so folks will do anything that they can to get substances in order to avoid withdrawal. At a certain point, addiction is no longer about getting high. It's about avoiding withdrawal. And traffickers will use that as a control tactic. Whatever someone can use to keep another person compliant, they're going to use, because they can make a ton of money doing it.
Yeah. And some of the tactics that we've talked about are very sophisticated in that you don't know it's being done to you till it's too late.
Yeah, right? Absolutely. When it was me, I did not know I was in deep until I knew that I was even in it all. And there was blackmail, there was psychological coercion, there was manipulation. There were all of these like mind control tricks that we see in like very sophisticated organized crime units, things that like the CIA is trained to look for and deal with, and all of those kinds of things. It's extraordinarily complex, and it's very much reflective of what we see in domestic violence, where folks will avoid leaving their situation, or maybe not even avoid leaving it, but won't feel that they are able to leave their situation because they have this strong connection with their abuser, with their trafficker, whatever that may be, if that's a trauma bond, or they're controlling their finances, or they've got they know the location of family members or something like that. Exit is so difficult because of those things. You're in so deep, you can't even necessarily reach an arm out far enough to grasp something to pull you out.
And I remember someone sharing, who you and I both know, in Connecticut, when she was trafficked, is she was convinced nobody would help me at all. I'm worthless, because she was trafficked from being a child on, and so had no identity that wasn't connected to her trafficker, and because she was convinced she was worthless by him, she was convinced there would be nobody who would ever help me.
Yeah. The self-esteem piece of things is huge in Exit. And our work at Amirah, all of our work is focused on three main things: is economic stability, communal connections, and self-esteem. And they all feed on each other. You can't have one of the three or two of the three. You have to have all three in order for Exit and recovery to work.
Say the three again, please.
Economic stability, communal connections, and self-esteem. And that self-esteem piece of things is really important, because if I don't believe that I'm worth it, I'm not going to show up every day the way that I need to make hard decisions.
Yeah.
Because recovery is extraordinarily difficult. I mean, this is almost like running a marathon, week after week after week after week. And if you don't believe that you're worth it, you're going to go right back to where you feel comfortable, which is being treated like you're worthless.
Yeah. And so tell us more about Amirah then. What do you guys do in your ministry in this space?
Yeah, so we operate in a very unique niche space. We really focus on trauma-informed poverty reduction for folks exiting the sex trade. And a big piece of that is also looking at personal stability. And so, we offer comprehensive case management to get people connected to the resources that they need that are going to serve them long term. We do peer care navigation, where we've got a bunch of folks on staff with lived experience, who also have professional credentials in life coaching, social work, case management, these kinds of things, to come alongside folks and not necessarily say, like, I know exactly what you lived through, but have that empathetic piece of things where if you haven't traded sex, you just don't necessarily understand entirely what that feels like and what you're coming out of. So we do something called peer care navigation, where you've got lived experience talking to lived experience. We have an amazing rapid rehousing program that we couple with our economic mobility program called On the Rise, where in our rapid rehousing program, folks are put in their own apartments. We pay the rent for up to 2 years, and they participate in our economic mobility program with housing navigation. So at the end of that 2 years, our goal is getting this person into housing that they can pay for, that they can sustain. They have an educational or vocational pathway. They have a living wage job. Basically everything that's going to put them in a position of economic stability, because it goes back to poverty, right? Most of the sex trade is generated by poverty. So we have to overcome poverty, but from a trauma-informed lens, understanding that everyone that we work with has equated their worth to monetization of their bodies. How do we talk about finances, while understanding that, this person's self-worth is entirely wrapped up in money? How do we separate those two things? How do we get someone to a point where they can pay their bills and not worry about someone holding that over them that's going to put them right back in the sex trade?
And so I want to pick at this point on poverty a little bit if we can, because I want to be careful that people who are listening to this might be saying, well, so I don't live in a poor town or a poor neighborhood and there's not poverty here. Therefore, I don't need to be concerned about this in my community. Children in my community are at risk. Women or young boys or young men are not at risk. Is that a fair way to think about it, or are they missing some key pieces?
Mm. You don't know what you don't know. Is what it comes down to. I mean, you don't know that someone driving a Beamer didn't max out every single credit card that they have in order to drive that Beamer and to make it look a certain way. You don't know that the kid down the street isn't, on some social media app where some predator is grooming them and is going to go pick them up at a bus station. You don't know who's moving into your community. You don't know who's moving out of your community due to poverty. Most of the United States is a paycheck away from being homeless. So I think that assumption, I would really challenge folks to look that assumption in the face and respond to it with humility and this understanding that I don't know the intimate lives of my neighbors, or I might not know the secrets that someone else is holding onto, etc. There's anyone can move into a vulnerable situation at any point in time. But I will say that most of the folks that are in the commercial sex trade in the United States, we're talking about women and girls, we're talking about vulnerable boys, we're talking about majority folks of color, disproportionate impact on LGBTQIA plus community. And so while your community, if you live in like a white affluent community, might not be at as high of risk, there's still risk associated there, and we really need to be thinking about this in terms of risk aversion, of not thinking that my community is immune, but maybe my community is at low risk. And so how do I not only think about prevention in my community, but then how do I think about my adjacent communities who are at high risk?
Yeah.
And let's start working with them.
Well, and how do I even think about the bedroom upstairs that my kids are in on social media, that we may be fine financially, but I don't know who's grooming them.
Right.
And so are there warning signals or warning signs or something that when I see something, it should make me question whether or not, and then I want to ask you, what do I do if I question, but are there some things to look at that I would say, hey, that's probably an indicator something's not right?
So to talk about red flags, we'd need like a full day training. If folks want to do that training with us, we offer that training at Amirah. Like call us, we'll do that training for your church, your school, your organization, whatever it is. It's really hard to get into the details of red flags without also talking about underlying vulnerabilities, such as like prior sexual abuse, prior physical abuse, all of those things. And warning signs are going to look different in different people. Warning signs for a 12-year-old are going to look very different than warning signs for a 22-year-old. Warning signs, in LGBTQIA plus community are going to look different than in other communities. So we give a very comprehensive training on red flags to help people feel very equipped to look at all of those things. And so I feel that I would do a disservice by sort of giving like a 2-sentence answer, and all of my fellow folks with lived experience, I think, would be like, hold up, girlfriend, you missed 18 of these things.
Yeah. And no, I think that's great. And then, right. So the offer is out there. Folks want to engage in this. And I think it's it's not just a community and justice issue. It's a what's going on in your family issue. But I have seen some stuff online that there's this hand signal. Is that a real thing, or is that just a made up online thing?
I don't know anything about this nonsense. Well, the way that I get a lot of questions about those kinds of things, the like myths that are out there, like the like something gets stuck on your car at Target, or like you go to Starbucks and so here's the thing. if someone is being exploited, they are being isolated to the point where they don't even have the opportunity to learn the hand signal in the first place.
Yeah.
So they don't even know, they wouldn't even know that that hand signal exists. So just logically, from a very logical perspective, it's easy to dismiss a lot of these myths, because just with the way that the sex trade operates and traffickers, when we sort of like dig back toward where did that hand signal, information come from, it usually did not come from anyone in the sex trade or relationship to the sex trade. Very commonly just someone looking for likes on social media.
And we do see stories periodically of like a stewardess on an airplane or something, seeing something's not right and intervening with law enforcement, not directly. Yeah. But what they don't typically talk about that, and as a lot of the airlines, maybe even all of them, are providing training to their employees to be able to spot exactly those kinds of things. So it's also not my gut told me, or I heard Mary talk one day for 2 minutes, and it's more involved than that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's usually very clear, where like I know of cases where a girl got put on a plane with her trafficker, and just every time the stewardess came by, she made direct eye contact with her and would not let go of that eye contact. There was this like understanding of, okay, and that stewardess then like came up with an excuse to separate that girl from the guy that was with her, and gave that girl the opportunity to say like, please help me. Yeah. So often folks are accompanied by their abusers, by their traffickers. They can't communicate when the person is there, right? So that's why, like, when we train healthcare, we really encourage healthcare workers, find an excuse to separate those folks, and not just have the guy sit outside the exam room, right? Take her to another part of the hospital, another part of the doctor's office or something like that, where he's not going to be able to see her exit through a back door or something like that, because he's absolutely going to go after her and follow her, right? Like it's about truly separating the two so that she can feel comfortable saying, hey, something's not right. I need help. I need to get out of here.
Yeah. And so now we talked last time, and so I wanted to follow up with you this time. Last time you were knee deep in your doctorate work. And so talk to us about, if you're still, what is your doctorate work on, and are you still knee deep in it?
I am 7 days out of being knee deep in it. I defended my dissertation last week. Degree was conferred on Saturday, and
congratulations!
Man, does that feel good?
Congratulations!
Thank you. Yes. So my dissertation is called "Selling Sex in America." And it's a qualitative, it's a review of qualitative data that we have in the United States that interviewed folks trading sex in the past 10 years, and then a qualitative inquiry to service providers on their policy perspectives regarding prostitution. And really what the document sort of comes down to is showing that prostitution is a phenomenon of poverty, homelessness, and addiction, that folks trading sex very often are making rational choices based on a limited set of options in front of them, which is, I think, very important for folks both within this movement and outside of this movement to understand that, because I think that this population, and me being a member of this population, I've felt it, this sort of idea that folks trading sex are stupid and they just didn't like figure a way out. Well, often they're very smart and they're making very rational decisions. Sometimes they're moral decisions to trade sex, because it's better for me to risk harm to myself than to risk harm to someone else. Like, if my options are trade sex or commit fraud against my grandmother and take away her benefits in order to pay my bills, then the moral decision for a lot of folks is trade sex so that I don't harm grandma. So it talks about that, and it really talks, at the end of the day, about how criminalizing the sale of sex actually perpetuates prostitution. We think that arresting folks for selling sex helps, but that criminal record keeps them right where they are. That cycle of poverty just continues. And so it comes down to, hey, we should decriminalize the sale of sex, continue to penalize buyers because they drive the market, and really ramp up poverty reduction services.
To hear the rest of this interview, join us next week. Thanks so much for listening, and God bless you.